Okay, so we are live finally, and welcome Dr. Kirpal Singh to the
Sasika,
REXperience
thank you.
School Convos that we have with inspiring authors like you from around the world. Namaste.
Thank you
Assalamu
so much for
alaikum,
having me.
salam, shalom, sat sri akal, and
Sasika, thank
welcome
you.
to the
Thank you.
Author Experience Conversations. So, and my name is Jerry Almeida, and I'm your host for the evening. And a very warm welcome to all the
Thank
participants
you.
who have joined us on Facebook Live to listen in to insights on creative thinking and creativity from Dr. Kirpal Singh, who's a globally renowned expert on the subject of creativity. So welcome once again, Dr. Kirpal Singh.
Thank you. Thank you
It's
for
been a
having me,
wonderful
Jerry.
journey working with you and Tahira for the Golden Door Awards, where we are collaborators along with the Rex Karmavir Global Fellowship and Karmavir Chakra Awards that we instituted with the UN. And
Right.
like we always say to all the award recipients, that the biggest gift, award, reward, recognition is not just the medal and the citation, but the learning that you get from all the fellows who attend the conferences and the
Right.
learning forums. So our biggest gift has always been learning.
Right.
And that's what our focus is on: life, leadership, and learning to learn lessons, as we call it. Because most of
Wonderful.
us go to school and college and we study, we don't
Right.
learn. And
Correct.
learning to learn has been identified as the most essential skill of the future, because most
Right.
of us study just to get a degree and a high percentage, but we don't inculcate and imbibe and internalize the learning. And
Right.
there is a definitive difference between studying and learning to learn. And learning to learn is all about curiosity, creativity, and the love of learning. And
Right.
today we are going to talk about creativity, which is one of the biggest triggers of learning to learn, which is the most
Wonderful.
essential skill of the future. So Dr. Kirpal Singh, every Sunday at 7:30 India time, we invite authors like you and focus on three genres of books. The first genre is self-help, personal discovery, personal development, and transformation. Books like what you write, books like what I write. I write
Right.
stories about true stories of real heroes. And then I
Right.
have the Mojo Inspirator book series, which is all about life, leadership, and learning to learn lessons.
Right.
So that's the first genre. The second genre is biographies, autobiographies, stories of
Right.
very inspiring leaders and real heroes. And that's the second genre that we focus on. And the third genre is books that focus on righting wrongs, which
Right.
is exactly how we collaborated for the Golden Door Truth and Integrity Awards, because we
Right.
celebrate truth writers and truth creators. So we focus on books which have been written to raise concerns about social, political, economic uh, issues that are plaguing our world. So that's the
Right.
third genre of books. So we are very happy to have you with us today, and I'm
Thank you
sure
so
that
much.
we will get insights for all the genres from you today.
Thank you. Yeah. Great
So
privilege to be with you, Jerry. Yeah.
thank you, and I look forward to learning from you, like all the other participants who have joined us on
Mutual. It's mutual.
Facebook's Facebook. Yes, I see a few people who are joining in the waiting room. I think you've given them this link. This link is only for the speakers, because
Oh,
they have to watch on Facebook
I
live.
see.
And anyway, because Christopher also had joined earlier. Anyway, I
Right.
asked them to
That's
join
my
on.
son. Yeah, Christopher.
All right. Okay. Brilliant. Brilliant. Okay. And there's Alaya and there's Simon. Maybe we'll just admit them and just tell them to join on Facebook Live.
Yeah.
So Dr. Kirpal Singh, to begin with, without further ado, Elia and Simon, you will have to join on Facebook Live, please. This is only for the speakers. Sorry about that.
Sure, no worries.
Please join on Facebook Live. The page is
Yeah.
called Rex
Hi, Ivan.
Ideas. Rex Ideas.
Okay.
All right. Thank you.
Thanks.
So, Dr. Kirpal Singh, to begin with, just tell us a little about your life journey, the story of your life, right from childhood to your young days as a
Okay.
dashing young, tall, dark, and handsome man. And then what is it that inspired you to take up teaching? Because teaching, like you said, does not pay much.
Sure.
It's and yet teaching is what makes all of us into who we are. And I have
Sure.
huge respect for teachers, because I think that should be the number one profession in the world, even about doctors. It's the most noble profession in the world. And I have a specific program for teachers, a teacher
Wonderful.
training program, which is called
Wonderful.
not just teachers, but enlighteners, awakeners, and transformers, because teachers
Wonderful.
have the power to see, touch, and change the future, right?
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
how do you kind of enable, empower, engage, energize, and enthuse students to become better citizens, better human beings, better family people, and change champions who are
Sure.
doing something to make the world a better, safer place. So I have
Sure.
huge respect. So I'm looking forward to learning from you about your life journey, right from childhood to your young days to what
Sure.
you're doing now, and what is the plan going forward. What is your vision going
Sure.
forward?
Sure.
Go ahead. The
So
stage
let
is
me
all
begin
yours.
with childhood,
Yes.
where most journeys begin.
Right.
So as soon as I was conscious of the fact that I was a real person, I think probably at the age of about 3.5 or 4, I began to realize that my existence was in some ways very unique, because I found myself not with my parents. I found myself with my grandmother, my paternal grandmother, my father's mother. And though I was born in Singapore, I found myself actually 500 miles north in what was then called the Federation of Malaya. It was not yet Malaysia, it was Malaya. And this was the year 1953, 54. And I was a little kid sort of walking around and all that. But I'd been given a small task to sort of, follow the grown-ups. And my Puaji, my father's sister, who was bringing me up, gave me a little kind of a stick, just a wooden stick. And with this wooden stick, I was supposed to look after a 48 herd of cows. All right. So in this herd, there were 48 cows with one bull. And the bull, of course, led the cows, and me was just behind there. And I'll just hit the cow once in a while with a little cane, and they all follow, And so we go to the sort of forest area or trees and where the woods were and all that, so that the cows could gaze on the grass and everything. And I just sat down, under a tree and just look at them. And every now and then I would shout and say, "Oi!" or something like that. And all the cows would be suddenly stunned that, the master has spoken. So I realized that actually power can be quite unique and quite funny. That though I was not able to command anybody beyond the age of 5, I was able to command a whole herd of about 48 cows with one bull. I thought that was quite a unique experience and a unique sort of distinction. Of course, I realized very quickly that there were other 5-year-old boys and 6-year-old boys all also doing similar things, but in different parts of the area. We had sort of designated areas for each of us so that we wouldn't fight and our bulls wouldn't fight and cross over to steal somebody's, cows or something like that. So that's how my life began very early. I want to share, though, for those others who may be listening to this, the experience of growing up without parents. This was quite, at first it was quite perturbing. And indeed, I was very shy to even talk about this whole issue. Like people would say, "Where are your parents?" and all that. And I would just say, they are in Singapore. And to some extent, this was the truth. But to a large extent, I myself didn't quite know what was the truth. So today, I think at 73, I think I don't think anybody, including my parents who are no longer around, would mind my sharing the truth. The truth was, in those days, intercultural engagements and marriages were quite rare. And my father, being told by his mother, my grandmother, that he could do whatever he liked, but he should never remove his turban. Indeed, my grandmother, my father's mother, said the same thing to me. She said, "Dera, you can do anything you like, but never remove your turban." So as a result, in spite of a lot of people telling me to remove my turban, I still have my turban because of the promise I made my dadiji, my grandmother. So that's where the story begins. My father, though, was a very unique human being. I mean, he was the first Sikh to be a well-known boxer in Singapore. And because in those days, Singapore was part of the Federation of Malaya, he went around boxing, from one end of the sort of, Malayan Peninsula to the other end. So from Singapore to Penang and all that, he covered lots and lots of cities. And when he was not working as a clerk in the British administration that was running Singapore, because Singapore was a colony, he would do this on the side and enjoy quite a good income. What he also did enjoy was the, I think to him, very welcome attention of a lot of women. And so I began quite early in life to realize that my father was quite a popular man among the fairer sex. Of course, as I grew older and older, I realized that this is one of the strange peculiarities about boxing as a sport. Though a lot of women do not actually attend boxing rings, when the boxers are fighting, they actually follow boxers and their biographies and their histories very closely. And so my dad, even though, to a large extent, much of the world didn't know his real life, very soon his sisters, my puaji with whom I was living, or who was bringing me up, they would gather around, they'd talk, and somebody else would come in and say, so how's your pau doing? How's your older brother doing in Singapore and all that? And so the stories would begin. Much later in life, I was with my father, who was quite elderly by then, in UK. And we were in Birmingham and talking with his sister. And his sister said, so Pauji, she said, tell me, how did you manage all these women that came into your life when you were a young, very famous boxer? And he said, what can I tell you? As one left by the back door, a new one came by the front door.
Right. Reminds me of what Julio Iglesias used to say. He used to say, one woman at a time.
That's right. One woman at a time.
I'm a one-woman man, one woman at a time.
One-woman man.
Right.
Which is technically correct.
Right. Right. I understand.
Correct.
I understand. Yeah. I see you. Now, you reliving and relishing your past.
Now, my father, of course, broke custom, not once but twice. My mother, I think some people know, but probably many don't know. My mother was actually Scottish, and she had come from Glasgow to Singapore with her two brothers a long time ago, because the brothers wanted to seek their fortune in the Far East. Now, of course, I think from the UK's positioning, we are in the Far East, but I'm in Singapore, so with people coming from there to here. And so their young sister, who was only 16 at that point, thought, since she was at a bit of a wit's end after the exams, what would she do? And she followed the brothers to Singapore. Now, one of the brothers, the older one, was a very, very keen boxing fan. Now, what this means is that whenever there were boxing matches in Singapore, he would make sure that he was there, and where possible, his brother was there too. Now, when the young sister came to be with the brothers for a while, for 3 months, she would accompany them to these boxing bouts, And in 2 of them, my father featured, and my father being the champion, and there was a category of weights, which is now no longer around, I think, called bantamweight. And so my dad was a bantamweight champion.
Right.
Now the category bantamweight, they wonder what bantamweight is,
The category still exists, by the way.
In some place, but no longer in Singapore. Yeah,
I think,
It's
okay.
So she went to, these boxing bouts and all that. And my dad was absolute killer when he came to women. He would just look at one and focus on one, and that's it. She was immediately his. They just would yield to him. Right. So there was my mom at 16 being seduced by my dad. And before anybody realized it, I was growing in her tummy. Okay. All right. And so it was quite an interesting thing. So I am the product of a mixed sort of union. Right. They formalized the union as soon as they realized that this little fellow was in there somewhere. And so they did a marriage ceremony in a Sikh temple. And that's where the story begins. That was in 1948. And in 1949, March, I saw the world. I came out and I was born.
Very nice.
Now, shortly after I was born, my father decided that all the time that the wife had been pregnant with me, and, as I was nearing and also having been now born, he and mom didn't have much time together as a private couple. So he decided very ingeniously to tell my mom that this little fellow is a bit of a hindrance to our journey. Why don't we go and leave him with my mother? That means my grandmother, my father's mom. And so he did, much to the agreement with my mom, because my mom thought that would be good, give them a bit of private time. And there's one in sepia, which is very clear and shows mom to be absolutely gorgeous, beautiful, with wonderful reddish brown hair, which Scots women, are quite well known for. So anyway, that's the earliest part of my journey. And then, of course, my journey carried on in Malaysia, what is today Malaysia, but then Malaya. And at the age of 6, my father's older brother, my Tayaji, my uncle, decided that, being in Perak, he was in Singapore with my dad. He decided that, my being in Malaya would not be very good for my education. So he then came up and took me back from Perak, Malaya, to Singapore and enrolled me in an English primary school. And so in 1957, I was in primary 1. Singapore was then still a colony, a British colony. And so many of my teachers were basically English men and English women from the UK who had come out for, a couple of years of experience teaching and working and living in the Far East. So it was quite a strange experience for them to introduce themselves, that here I am in the Far East. And we were saying, well, Singapore in the Far East, we are here, and all of that. So from day one, I began to be very caught up in trying to understand language and words. I had been fortunate because a number of people around me in Malaya, around my village, actually it was a real village modeled after Indian villages, from the Punjab. And most of the people around were Punjabis. But there were some who began to teach ABC, to the village kids. And so by the time I came to Singapore, I knew my ABC to Z quite well. And I could introduce myself and all of that. And so I think I had a distinct advantage in that primary 1 of 1957 Singapore. My classmates, mainly Chinese, because Singapore, the majority is Chinese. But of course, we had Malays, we had other kinds of Indians, Sindhis, Tamil speakers. There was one Malayali guy, one Telugu guy as well. And we were a merry band. I mean, we were young boys of 6 and 7. And so, we mingled and we mixed and we grew up. Of course, we had fights, young boys get into all kinds of fights. We played marbles, we played the usual games, we would have the spinning tops. So if my top is better than yours, they'll knock your top out. So whichever top remains spinning the longest wins, and they will win like 5 cents or 10 cents or whatever. But in those days, 5 cents and 10 cents could buy you a very nice cake or could buy you a nice, cold drink or a cup of coffee and those kinds of things. I'm talking about 1957, 58.
Right.
Cut a long story short, my teachers in the primary school, one of them I think is still alive, very old now. She recognized that maybe there was some potential in this young guy called Kirpal in terms of mastering English. So she emphasized to the colleagues in that school that, think carefully about this guy and look after him well, because he may be a good guy in terms of some kind of academic achievement. Of course, at that point, I didn't know this. I only got to know all this much later in life when I was an adult. And they wanted to meet me, my old teachers. And so then began a journey of actually trying to master English. Now, my uncle, with whom I was then made to live, because my father really had no time for me. I mean, he was just interested in his own life. And his boxing routines were such that he was quite often not home, until very late at night and all of that. Because boxers, as I said, are quite notorious womanizers. And so was that. So my uncle brought me up Now, my uncle was the first Sikh in the whole of Southeast Asia to become a Christian. He had a sort of a godfather in school in Malaysia, and this godfather, called Nigel Williams, was a New Zealander, a Kiwi guy, who decided that the best way to have this young man, who was quite bright, my uncle, educated, was to adopt him. And so he adopted him as his godson. And so at the age of 16, my uncle began to literally live in the same house as his teacher and his principal of that school. And when Nigel Williams decided that he had had enough of Ipoh and Malaya and Perak, he decided to come to Singapore, and with him he brought my uncle. At the age of 17 and a half, my uncle was employed by Prudential Insurance, one of the earliest insurance companies to start business in Singapore. And that was quite interesting because, even as I grew up at the age of 20, 25, much older men would come to me and say, your uncle and I were together in 1935, 1945, and all that. Of course, to me, these were just dates. And I couldn't actually at that young age imagine. But as I grew older, I began to appreciate more and more how deep and long those friendships were and had been, and what they mattered, not only to my uncle, but also to myself. Because like my uncle, I was young and single, and he was not so young, but also single. He remained a bachelor throughout his life. It was very interesting to be living with a man that even the late Mr. Lee Kuan Yew, who was my Singapore's first prime minister, when he met with me over the years and all of that, we had several good conversations together. He would always ask me about my late uncle. Actually, the first time when he asked me, I told him about it. But 4 years later, he asked me again, by the way, how's your uncle? I think he had forgotten that I had told him that my uncle had passed on. And he always would look at me and he said, you know what? He was a good man. And he said, he left us because of you. Do you realize what that means? Your uncle left us, meaning the political party, all right? There was the ruling government of Singapore. He said, your uncle left us because he wanted no politics, because you were his ward and you were his responsibility. And he therefore left us to make sure that you had a good education and he spent more time with you. Now, the good thing about my late uncle was that he had a wonderful library. And so from very young, age 8, age 9, I was exposed to wonderful books, Machiavelli's The Prince, Plato's Republic, Aristotle's Ethics, and all of the classics. Of course, Shakespeare and the usual lot were there. But I was also surprised as I grew a little bit older to realize that books like Lady Chatterley's Lover, by Lawrence and all that were also there. And so my uncle didn't believe in censorship. He believed that the young, as they grew up, would be their own, best censorship guides. And so I was, of course, at that young age, I was quite bored looking at these books and trying to flip a page or two. It didn't mean very much to me. But it began to mean a lot to me when I became about 13 and 14. And suddenly, there was a kind of sexual awakening and all of that. But one thing my uncle had made sure is that until I finished my O-levels, which those days were the Cambridge O-levels, the University of Cambridge set these exams. O-level just meant ordinary level. Later on, they introduced the A-levels, which was advanced level and all of that. So the school certificate was the O-levels and the higher school certificate was the A-levels. And I began to realize that colonialism not only left a very, very heavy footprint in both Singapore and Malaya, but also in the minds of everyone that lived for maybe more than 2 years, because through the length and breadth of the then Federation of Malaya, including the 3 British colonies, Singapore, Malacca, and Penang, which were quite unique in the ethnic constitution, in the ethnic cosmopolitan setup of these 3 little colonies. We were quite unique in that these 3, Singapore, Malacca, and Penang, emphasized the primacy of English education above the vernacular education, which was also available in Chinese, in Malay, in Tamil, in Punjabi, and 1 or 2 other languages, And that meant that those of us who were sort of, I would say, fortunate, But those of us who found ourselves in an English medium school, of course, began to embrace the language. As a result, I'm actually quite ashamed to say that my Punjabi is absolutely pathetic. My knowledge of Malay, which is Singapore's national language, is not bad. I can reasonably read and write it and speak it. But of course, over the years, as I began to specialize more and more in English, my understanding and mastery over Malay sort of diminished. But what happened is, because of the Chinese majority in Singapore, I acquired a bit of a flair for different Chinese dialects. And indeed, I even tried learning Mandarin in a serious way in school. And it was very difficult. I think Mandarin is among the more difficult of languages in the world. Right. But I at least have a reasonable speaking sort of capability in it. I used to be able to write and at least, say a few quite nice words in terms of literary Chinese, but which are now all forgotten as far as I'm concerned. But I began to realize that more and more, instead of being a doctor or a lawyer or an accountant or any of these great professions, engineering, my late uncle wanted me to be an engineer because he was himself a failed engineer. He had to drop out of engineering degree, satisfy himself with a diploma, and start working in a steam engine kind of outfit where he could bring some money home, both to support his mother, my grandmother, as well as his sisters, my puajis, my aunties. So anyway, to cut a long story short, my interest in English was also enhanced by my school teachers, who began more and more to realize that maybe, my passion for learning English, my willingness to sacrifice a number of other subjects, because we had to do about 9 subjects for the O-level exams. So I concentrated and focused on English language and English literature. Actually, while I'm at it, I would say that I focused more on English literature than I did in English language. Because one of my teachers had told me, if you master English literature, the language will just come to you almost naturally. And so I stuck to that. I began to read very widely. I began to read a lot of poems in English. I began to read short stories in English. I began to read Shakespeare in the original and all of that from a very early age. So that by the time I came to my O-level exams, I was able to BS a lot, I think your listeners will know BS.
I get that. And Dr. Singh, I'll have to request you that you'll have to compress this within the next 5 minutes, please, because we've gone way beyond the 15 minutes.
Sorry, yeah. So
yes.
okay.
I didn't want to interrupt you, but yes, you'll have to tell us in snapshots.
So that was the journey up to A levels, and then I did quite well, and I had a choice, to, as I said, go to law or medicine or anything, but I chose to study English at the university, much to the horror and shock of everybody, including the government, that was willing to give me a scholarship. But in those days, and this is quite an interesting little side note, at the interview for the scholarship, my interviewers told me, this was a Public Services Commission, the highest body governing all kinds of admin services in Singapore. They told me that I had to give up sociology and philosophy, my choice of other 2 subjects, in addition to English. And I said, no. And they said, well, then you won't get the scholarship. And I said, that's fine with me. But just for, information, I wanted to know what the other subject they wanted me to read instead of philosophy and sociology. And they said, you could do history or geography, those kinds of subjects. And I said, no, thank you. So that meant that I sacrificed my scholarship, much to the astonishment of my professor. As I came back to the university, he had already received a call from the Public Services Commission saying that your young man is very stubborn. He can't be persuaded to change his mind, and so he will not get a scholarship. So of course, my professor was very upset, but he also put his arm around my shoulder and he said, you know what? You did well. You proved that you're a man, not beholden to anybody. I'm proud of you. He said, I'll pay your first term fees. And he did. In those days, the fee was $1,500 per term, and he paid that. And till today, I'm very, very eternally grateful, because no way could I have paid that myself. However, this man, Professor Maurice Baker, one of the Anglo-Indians, he came, his father came from India. He was born in Malaya, and he became head of English department at the University of Singapore then. He was very generous and kind, but he also got me into employment. So he made sure that I was employed by, those days there was Adult Education Board night classes. So even as I studied first year university, I was already teaching the A-level students that had enrolled to do private exams as private candidates. So cut a long story short, my early life was full of a lot of interesting things, but most of all, hard work. I had no time to have fun. I had no time to play a lot of games and all of that. But whatever time I had, I spent actually reading and began writing. I began writing poems as early as 1963, 1964, when I was sort of year 7 or year 8 in secondary school. And all these things have stood me in very good stead, because while I was not always, able to have a lot of good conversations with my peers, I was able to have surprisingly good conversations with my elders. And it didn't matter what, ethnic background these elders came from, but those that I mixed with very much were those who were very, very fluent in English. And many of them actually told me, you really need to, make sure that you master the language so well that you will be the top. And so I think, God blessed me. In 1966, I topped Singapore in the O levels. And then 2 years later, I did the same thing for my A levels, as far as English was concerned. So I then never looked back. And after that, it was just, in a way, plain sailing. I mean, there was a lot of hard work at university, but I also had to do other things to earn my money. And by then, my uncle was quite old, the one who was bringing me up. And so he stopped working. I had to earn a bit more money to make sure that there was enough food on the table for both of us. But when I finished my basic degree, the professor, Maurice Baker, said, you have topped the whole university in terms of English. And so from now on, your life will be easier because you get a scholarship. And so then I had a university scholarship to finish my master's degree. And then they gave me another scholarship, a big public service scholarship, to go to any university I liked and study my doctorate. Now, I had been accepted then by Jesus College, Cambridge, and to work under a very famous man then called Raymond Williams. Raymond Williams, well known for a big book called Culture and Society. He was studying the impact of how the study of literature, for example, study of sociology, philosophy, impacts the sensibility of people who run for administrative service and all of that. Very unfortunately, this uncle of mine fell ill. And as a result, I found that going to England would be a bit of an awkward problem, because in those days, it took 3 days to reach from Singapore to England. We had to stop a day in India, then another day or two in Greece, and then finally land in London. By the way, Cornell University had also offered me a scholarship, but to go to Cornell would have meant 5 days of air travel and also a little bit more money. But anyway, I had wonderful scholarships coming my way, but I chose Adelaide, which was the most respectable English department in Australia then. And it was the nearest to me from Singapore. And, a 9-hour aeroplane flight would take me from Singapore to Adelaide by way of Perth. So that's where I went for my doctorate. And then after that, when I returned, it was basically plain sailing, because I was doing quite well as a university don. And I was promoted very early from lecturer to senior lecturer to associate prof, and finally to prof later. But I found a sense of fulfillment that while the early years were full of struggle, the middle and later years were becoming fairly comfortable. Yeah.
So did you choose teaching, or did teaching choose you?
I think both.
Okay.
I think both.
Okay.
I chose teaching first out of sheer need.
Right.
It was
right.
that at that point not a want. I didn't want to be a teacher, but there were no other job openings for me. I mean, unless I wanted to be a bus conductor, which I did, by the way. I worked as a bus conductor for 3 weeks.
Wow.
And it was
Excellent.
quite interesting, because when people would recognize me saying, wow, hey, can I get a free ticket?
I'm sure that experience of working as a bus conductor made you understand that every job, every work that requires hard labor is to be respected, what we call as dignity of labor, which many in India don't understand.
Right.
Unfortunately, maybe most people
Many
around
did,
the world
yeah.
don't understand, even in the West,
Correct,
right?
right. The
Yeah.
dignity of labor is something I learned very early in life.
And
But the interesting,
I always say this, that while we hero worship corrupt business people, entrepreneurs, celebrities, etc., we fail to worship the people who keep our streets clean, people who keep our, the janitors,
sure,
the people who work hard. They are the
yeah,
ones who deserve our respect, not the corrupt businessmen and political leaders who
correct,
deserve our respect.
absolutely,
Right.
absolutely.
And I've
But a
just
lot
written
of
a very
corrupt,
hard piece on this for an academic journal. I'll share it
correct,
with
yeah,
you later.
that'd be
Uh,
great, yeah. But
Interestingly,
a lot
some
of
of the
corrupt
some of
businessmen run the world,
right, I know.
very sadly.
Unfortunately, because with all their
Yeah,
jiggery pogery, they managed to
correct,
get into those offices.
correct.
I must tell you, I've been to your birthplace, Ipoh, and
Yeah.
I
Oh,
visited.
wow.
Yes. And
Okay.
one of the insights I want to share with all the people in the audience
Right.
is that although your father's and your mother's intercultural marriage did not work, I always say this, especially for India. I'm by the way, I was born in a family that practices Christianity. I don't believe in any god or
Wow.
religion now.
Okay.
And I'm married to a girl who's a Sardarni. She's from the Sikh
Wow.
community.
Wonderful. Okay.
We've raised our boys without any religion. Uh,
Wonderful.
and I always say that, especially in a country like India,
Right.
where we should celebrate unity in
Right.
diversity. And
Correct.
unfortunately, because many politicians have divided us, and currently
Sure.
it's completely
Sure.
polarized thanks to a
Sure.
complete moron and madman who's in the public office as the prime minister, whose name is Narendra Modi. And Narendra
Right.
Modi's only intent is to stay in power by playing the Hindutva card, and it's
Right.
completely polarized the community.
Right.
And I always say that the only hope for the world, especially for our country called India, I'm a citizen of India,
Sure.
and the only way is to encourage and empower inter-race, inter-caste, inter-religion, inter-region, and I would say even inter-country marriages,
Right.
because that is the only way to assure that we stay as one world, one sky, and one humanity. And I think that's the big insight I want to leave with everybody who's watching here. Please don't get
Absolutely.
polarized by corrupt politicians, business people. They're all doing it for their own selfish interests. They have no motive to really do anything good for the public, but just they do this to stay in power. So we have
Correct.
we have to learn. Though I'm not religious, I respect all religions, and I respect whichever gods and whoever gods you follow and believe in. Right? Being scientific by nature, I simply don't believe in all the fairy tales and fables which most
Oh, you don't
religions
believe in
tell.
all these scientific genetic theories that people are putting forward?
No, the scientific theories get lost when Adam and Eve get tempted by a talking serpent. Right? That's where the buck stops for me about the Bible. Right?
That's right. That's right. What a wonderful story that is. And no wonder we fell from paradise.
And I wonder how educated people fall for that nonsense. Anyway,
Yeah,
without
yeah.
going deeper into that,
Yeah.
Dr. Singh, like I was telling you, you had a great journey. It's been a very interesting journey
Yep.
from your childhood, when you had to fend for yourself, and of course you were lucky to have a grandmother and an uncle
Right.
who looked after you after your parents went their separate
Yes.
ways. And I must say thank you to you for sharing that so candidly and with all candor. And I'm sure the
No, there's
audience has
nothing
got
to
a,
hide. Yeah.
yes, I'm sure the audience has got a lot of insights from that. And
Thank
like I
you.
was telling you, our book series, one is called the Karma Kari book series,
Yep.
which is all true stories of
Yep.
real heroes. And when I say
Right.
real heroes, they are not just movie stars or sports stars. We have
Sure.
some of them also, but the reason that they get featured in Karma Kari or are given the Karma Veera awards is because they have done something to make a difference by being change champions. So we
Right.
celebrate champions of change.
Wonderful.
You don't need to only do something, some social work. You could
Sure. I see.
champion
Woman power and
change by
everything else.
changing
Yes.
mindsets. And now we are creating different categories like woman power, kid power,
Sure.
right? So it's a series of books. This is a kid power, which
Sure.
was launched a little before the lockdown. And then I have the other series called Mojosh Inspirator,
Right.
which is all about personal discovery, development,
Right.
transformation, which is called self-help books. And we've
Right.
researched almost 5,000 books and 25,000 research papers,
Wow. Wonderful.
3,000 near that.
Congratulations, man. This is
Yeah.
huge.
3,000 near-death experiences in 20. So for
Right.
me, for me, learning to learn is a passion, and I believe that
Wonderful.
if we get people to learn and understand that all change starts with the self, then the world will change and become a better, safer place. And that's what we do, and that's why we tell stories of. So we back the learning with real-time stories, with true stories,
Wonderful.
not with fables and fairy tales like what they tell you in the Bible, etc.
Sure.
Right? So we say that if
Wonderful.
this man could move a mountain, what
Yep.
stops you? And we are not telling a fairy tale. There is a
Right.
man who moved a mountain. That Dashrath
Sure.
Manji he was. And when I
Sure.
started writing the books, I was many smirked, many eyebrows were raised. Who
Right.
will want to read about all this
Right.
ordinary people? Why don't you write about celebrities? I said they don't inspire me. So I
Right.
stayed true to my cause, and then of course we signed the Asia's biggest book deal in
Wonderful.
2014.
Right.
But that said, I want to ask you, the reason I was giving you this background is because I want to ask you what inspired you as a teacher to get into creative thinking, and what inspired the book? What is the inspiration behind your book, Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans? What is the
Right.
inspiration behind the book? What is the thought behind that title? And
Right.
what do you mean by creativity across cultures? So there are three
Sure.
questions in there for you.
Sure. So what happened is in the year 1999, a new university was formally announced in Singapore, and that was called the Singapore Management University. I was at that point still teaching in another university, the Nanyang Technical University, having moved there from NUS, the National University of Singapore. I was seconded, and then the incoming vice chancellor of the new university, Singapore Management University, had requested my then current boss to have me seconded over to the new university to begin the arts program, the Bachelor of Arts. And so I moved. And in conversation with my new boss, I said, I've been thinking about a new subject, which is not taught in Singapore anywhere, and almost not taught in most, 90% of the universities around the world don't teach it. And he said, what could that be? And I said, creativity. He said, what? Creativity? Is that worth teaching at the university level? I said, it is worth teaching at the doctoral level. He said, yeah, that's what I thought. It's a PhD program, but it's not, going to appeal to undergraduates. I said, well, you know what, boss? Why don't we be the first university to be teaching creativity to every single undergraduate of our university? And he looked at me and he said, wow, you're thinking big. I haven't thought about this. And then he paused for about 2 minutes or so. And he said, we're on. He said, Kirpal, you're on. Let's do it. And that was so remarkable that, a lot of the main media of the world, the New York Times and all these, the Times of London, whatnot, they all carried small articles about this new university starting a brand new course and making it mandatory for every single undergraduate. And so for the first 10 years of the existence of Singapore Management University, every student had to do my course on creative thinking. And so about,
So
3 years
you muscled your course into the programs.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
Absolutely.
Brilliant.
And
that's the way to be.
I had by then met Tony Buzan, the great, creative
yes,
person.
Yes.
I had met Edward De Bono.
I met Tony Buzan too. Yes.
And have you met Edward De Bono as
no,
well?
I've never had the good fortune of meeting him.
Met
But
Edward De Bono
I've read
well.
all his books and I've used respect.
Right. So I started reading their books and thinking, and I thought that the one thing that struck me is as if reading their books, implied that creativity was an exclusive province for the whites, for the Europeans, for that culture, the Western world. And so that's when I began to be inspired and moved to write my own book, Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans. My idea was to fuse the Western, which is symbolized by thinking hats.
Right.
And colored turbans is this turban, all right, because we bring about a certain kind of flair, a certain exuberance, a certain passion to ballast the very sort of scientific, logical, analytical frame that the whites were offering, people like Tony Buzan. Later on, Tony Buzan and I became very good buddies. Okay. I never became very close to Edward De Bono. I think he was a little bit full of himself.
Right.
And even though I met him a few times and talked with him and all that, he always seemed to me a little bit condescending, which was a bit of a pain. but coming from
six
Malta.
thinking hats.
Yeah, six thinking heads. He came from Malta.
Right.
And I thought that Malta being a very small place, likewise, the mind was a bit small. But one thing that Edward de Bono did, he really broke new ground when he came up with not only the six thinking hats, but with lateral thinking.
Right. Lateral thinking, I think is his best work. It's his best work,
yeah.
yes.
Lateral thinking. And that, I think, inspired me to write my own book because, again, even in lateral thinking and all the other books, something about the East and the Asian cultures was missing.
Right.
And that's what
I'm very, very happy you said this because, what you're basically saying is that you fused the best
of East and West.
Of East and West, because
yes,
both cultures have a lot of best processes, world-class processes that can really change the game for the way individuals think. And when individuals thinking and mindsets change, the individual changes, and that changes cultures and changes society and changes the world. And that's why the Rex Karmavir mission, we again celebrate Eastern and Western wisdom.
Fantastic.
And I always say this, that the East mostly discovered and created all the concepts, but the West took them and made them better. And of course, they forgot to give the credit. Like yoga, a lot of people thought was the American concept. Till we had to tell the world that it's the Indian concept. And yes, of course, they've made it better. Seva, or community service and volunteering, is a concept from the East again.
Yes,
but you will see 7-year-olds volunteering in the United States and in Europe, while our 7-year-olds dance in reality shows, doing item numbers. So we've forgotten our best practices, unfortunately. Correct. While they've taken our best practices and made it better. And of course, the arrogance of the West, that they forgot to give credit to the East. And I'm very happy you said this, because this is exactly what we celebrate as learning to learn lessons in the Rex Karmavir Global Fellowship.
That's
so tell us more, sir. Tell us more about, what is the thought behind the title?
So I thought that one way of introducing that fusion, that very fertile fusion between East and West, would be to take headgear as a kind of symbol. So basically looking around, even though the Chinese have worn hats for a long time, so have some Arabian, countries and all of that, I thought basically hats represented the whites, the West, the cowboys, those kind of things.
Right. Absolutely.
And the turbans represented the older Asian civilizations, because a lot of people, wore turbans, right, in the old world. So I thought we'll bring these two together, not only East and West, but also old and new, and fuse them. And that's what I thought. And then I realized that I needed that little bit 3 words, that small 3 words downstairs, which I call creativity across cultures.
And what is the insight behind that?
The insight between in those 3 words, creativity across cultures, is that as I was researching into this, it was a university, a research grant that I had been given. So I spent 3-4 years researching the topic. I found that different cultures saw creativity very differently.
Right.
For example, China didn't actually welcome creative thinking until very recently. Because in China, the thing was, I think to a large extent, India may be in the same sort of, doldrums as well, or was in the doldrums for a long time.
Right.
The students followed the teacher.
Yes.
All right. It was almost considered horrible and almost like baseless and vulgar to do something that your teacher didn't approve. And therefore, you were always in the shadow of your guru,
Right.
But creativity means you could come onto your own.
Right.
Creativity means breaking new ground.
Right.
And this is why I not only gave it a very provocative title like Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans, but I also became more ambitious to say creativity across cultures.
Absolutely.
So scattered throughout the book,
And I'm very happy you said this, because in India, most jobs are in IT today.
Right.
And unfortunately, it's not IT. It's actually IT-enabled services, because IT basically needs innovation, right?
Absolutely.
And unfortunately, in India, none of the IT organizations which took tax SOPs for almost 3 decades or 4 decades, none of them, focused on innovation. They were only IT-enabled services, and they made I'm going to use a strong word. They made mules out of human beings, right?
Wow.
Because they outsourced the jobs from the United States and from
Right.
UK, and they just did rate arbitrage. Then they called it IT. It was not
Right.
IT, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, because we make mules out of human beings, we
Right.
don't encourage and we don't enable, we don't empower the creativity,
Correct.
right? A teacher will tell you that this is the way it's done because this is what the textbook says.
Correct.
But no, that's not the way to teach. And that's exactly our program for teachers, where we say you are not just teachers, you're enlighteners, awakeners, and
Correct.
transformers. Because you can
Absolutely.
see, touch, and change the future. And I think the
Correct.
wisdom lies in this one thought by
Yeah.
Socrates, who said, I
Yeah.
cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make you think.
Right.
What a powerful statement. Look at the
Very
humility of the
powerful.
teacher. And
Very
and it's called the Socratic learning method, which means
Yeah.
that you provoke insight.
Yeah.
You ask questions which generate ideas for action.
Correct.
You ask questions which generate thoughts, rather than
And you
saying
provoke.
what the book says is what is right. And to connect it to what I earlier said to you, that most of us around the world, except for a few European countries, we go to
Right.
school and college, including India and including
Right.
Singapore. It's all degree-led coercion to study and
Correct.
pass, because
Correct.
that education degree will get you a job and you will
Correct.
you'll become a career mule, right?
Correct.
We do not foster creative thinking. We do not
Correct.
foster lateral thinking. So
Correct.
so a teacher will always say, this is the way the sum is done. Like, it
Correct.
happened in our school.
Right.
And our eldest son, who loves maths, he eats, drinks, breathes,
Yeah.
dreams maths. He
Yeah.
asks questions in school. And a teacher actually had the audacity to tell us, well, at the parent-teacher meeting, that your son disrupts the class by
Right.
asking questions all the time. And I
Right.
normally keep, zip it during a
Zip it,
parent-teacher
yeah.
meeting, because I'm also a little alternative by thinking. And I say, if something
Right.
I say doesn't sit well with them,
Correct.
then I'll get scolding at home. So,
Right.
but I couldn't stop myself from saying that, ma'am, isn't that how curiosity works?
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
if you don't have the answers, that doesn't mean that he's asking the wrong questions. Because if you
Yeah.
remember what Albert Einstein said in his biography, I do not have any particular talent or genius. I
Correct.
just ask questions. I
Questions.
just
That's right.
ask stupid questions, right? and I think that is what is required in the
Absolutely.
pedagogy, andragogy, and the
Absolutely.
learn methodology. And I'm so
When
happy that
yeah.
you're speaking the same, we're on the same wavelength with this.
Absolutely.
Because curiosity is the biggest trigger of learning.
Right.
Curiosity even triggers creativity and love of learning, right?
Absolutely. When I first introduced creative thinking as a subject, and it was
Right.
the first in the whole world at university level, I sent my students out in groups to different places, the hawker centers, the markets, the university playground, the primary schools, any kind of outlet that they could find themselves. I said, think about two possibilities where you want to go with the group. And they will come up with all kinds of fascinating ideas, because when you let them free and they don't feel that, they are going to be punished for a silly idea or what people might think is a silly idea, then they feel very encouraged. And so my early creative thinking students were absolutely creative. I mean, they came up with all kinds of different projects. In fact, one day, about 2 years into the program, the Prime Minister was guest of honor at my university, and I was seated behind him. So during the interval, the reception time, he got up, he looked at me and he said, "You're the guy who's doing this creative thing at the university?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, very good, but make sure you don't make it so creative that I'm removed. Huh? That was quite funny.
Right.
He's still Prime Minister, by the way.
Right.
That was so funny. I thought that was his note of interest, and he's right. I mean, if you're creative enough, you can probably devise a strategy by which even the most powerful can be undone, right?
Absolutely. And that is the reason that education systems don't encourage creativity, because creativity means you ask questions, you
Correct.
voice your dissent. And
Correct.
the corrupt politicians and businessmen of the world don't want that. They want you to be mules. They
That's
want
right.
you to be mules who will just
Mules,
follow
that's
their
right.
diktat and follow the
Correct.
process that they lay
And
out.
carry their burdens.
Absolutely. And that's exactly what it says, right? That in one way or another, it debilitates creative thinking when you don't allow people to think, when you just tell them follow the process, because typical management language is don't think, you don't get paid for thinking, just follow the process. Well, the process is not perfect. The process needs continuous improvement. Kaizen. Nothing can be perfect. Perfection is the biggest lie of the world. And if you're not allowing people to continuously improve the process, you're actually committing harakiri, right? And people don't understand this. And I'm so happy that you're unpacking it in this little conversation that we're having.
In this conversation as well. Thank you. Yeah.
You know, I also read that you brought the learning to life, something which I also do, because, you know, rather than just give a lot of gyan and theories, you need to make that learning practical, pragmatic, and something that people can apply in their day-to-day life, right? And that's what I read that you did. You brought the entire concept of creativity to life by giving compelling stories from case narratives of people who are using creativity in their professional, personal life.
Absolutely.
Can you tell some of the stories? Can you tell about
some
of those?
I mean, this was very, very interesting, because it was the first time, at least in Singapore, where students began to be given real biographies of people who are at the frontiers of new things. The new could be anything. It could be a new product. It could be a new idea. It could be a new political system. It could be a new religion. It could be anything. So I told them to go to the source, find the founders of these new movements, and think and talk about them.
Right.
So it was really quite wonderful. I mean, for me, you know, coming from, you know, I mean, ancestors coming from India and all that, it was very heartening when a group of Chinese students, ethnically, actually came up and did a 1-hour presentation on Tagore, and how Tagore had been not only a poet, he had been to China twice, and he actually had fallen in love with some Chinese women as well. He learned some Chinese, and then he'd been in Singapore, and he lived there for a while. He met my uncle twice, and he was just an extraordinary man.
He was very creative and very gifted.
Absolutely.
In fact, all the Tagore brothers, not just Rabindranath Tagore, but including Rabindranath, who's his other brother. They were all very gifted, very creative. And you can see it in, you know, even the learning system that they created was called
learning to learn as well.
Right.
And fusing. And they try to fuse, you know, like Tagore would fuse Chinese metaphors and symbols with a very Bengali-centered kind of cultural, you know, orientation. And this was unique. And this is why a lot of people in India of those times, they were writing to each other saying, who is this brat, you know, this new young guy? I mean, who is he to tell us what we should be doing, which way we should be going? And who is he to talk about women so openly, you know, that kind of a thing. And of course, Tagore was open. I mean, he was a bit of a womanizer himself, but he was very open about all of this. And this, I think, gave courage to a lot of the young ones. Maybe not directly in Calcutta, because, you know, it could be a small place and people all knew, big families knew each other. But the moment they went out, and he encouraged going out, because he himself had traveled and gone out, and he encouraged all of that. You know, when he says on the seashore of endless worlds, right, where children play. But just imagine that line, on the seashore of endless worlds. If it's a seashore of endless worlds, you begin to wonder, you know, the audacity of using seashore of endless worlds. I mean, how that's infinity in a finite kind of space, right? On the seashore, finite space of endless worlds, that's infinity. Right. And he had collapsed. I think obviously he must have been influenced by Einstein as well.
and that very thought, the seashore of the endless world, you know, talks to you about how humanity is connected, how it's a world without borders, actually.
Correct.
And you're talking about creative thinking in religion. I mean, imagine a man who was so called burned to a virgin woman. And fathered by a Jewish child, by a Jewish God, then starts a religion against his father called Christianity, which is also now followed by the Muslims. And then you have the entire concept of creation, where Adam and Eve, right? So God creates Adam out of thin air, but it requires Adam's Eve to create the woman. Now that's a little uncanny and surprising for me. And then Adam and Eve have two sons first, and then they have the third son.
That's right.
And then you're wondering, like, you know, how did they reproduce?
That's right.
right? So technically, all of us are MFs, right? So
Yeah, yeah,
it's very creative, right?
yeah.
And I always say that God didn't create man, man created God, right?
There you
So
go.
so
There you
humans
go.
are very
Yeah,
creative by
we are
nature,
very creative.
because the whole idea is
Somebody, yeah,
how do you create a all compelling God who can then
correct.
be the voice that you use to enslave other lesser human
Absolutely.
beings, and that's
Correct. Yeah.
exactly how it worked.
A
So
lot
so
of provocative puzzles there. Yeah.
absolutely, I do this
Yeah.
all the time just to
You're very
provoke
good
thought.
with that, Jerry.
Right,
Right.
I somehow get challenged by people who just
Wonderful. Yeah.
sit down and wait for God to do something, and I'm like, he did send a message long ago that his productivity is down, he can't look
Yeah.
after 7.5 billion people, so he's like, I can only help those that who help themselves. And frankly, if you can help
Correct.
yourself,
Absolutely. Yeah.
you don't need her or him,
That's
whatever
right.
gender that God up there
Yep.
is,
Yeah.
right? So I joke around a lot with people because it just takes
Yeah.
the edge out of the truth that I'm
You got to
telling them.
take initiative, like you. Take initiative. Seize the moment. Yeah.
Right,
Do it.
right. So Dr. Singh, can you
Yeah.
read out some compelling paragraphs which will throw some more light on the concept of creativity and creative thinking, and
Yeah.
how that really helps everybody in their personal, professional discovery and development and transformation?
Okay. So let me just read this as a kind of prelude, and then I'll expand on it. Right.
Sure. And
So
the audience is posting on Facebook, and they're asking, where can you get the book? This
right.
is Karma Kari.
So
Can you show us your book like this,
yes.
Dr. Singh? And
Can
it's
you see
called
it?
Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans. And yes, it is available on Amazon and all leading bookstores of the world. It's distributed globally, and that's the book, Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans. Go ahead, Dr. Singh. Please read us
Thank you. Yeah.
read out a
So
couple or
just this one small
three
paragraph.
paragraphs which should give us really great insights into the concept of creativity and creative thinking.
Right. So Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans didn't just come about out of the blue. It came about when one fine day, a visitor to Singapore dropped by my university, asked to sit in and observe my class on creative thinking. And during the break, he said, "So you must use quite a bit of De Bono's thinking hats." I answered, "No, I use a lot of my own colored turbans."
Very nice.
He looked
Excellent.
at me. He looked at me in total disbelief before bursting out in laughter. And then we both laughed. And that was good. In fact, it was very good. I've often looked back at that moment as being special. And I hope when his name, by the way, is Jude Verloop from America, reads this book, he will know that if other circumstances had been right, he too would have been more directly involved in this part of this great journey. I think creativity must be seen as a life journey, right? People say that
you never stop creating till you're in the box.
You never stop creating, and you never stop learning. People always think that, those of us who are like more creative are somehow special and magical and all of that. No, actually, creativity is a lot of bloody hard work. I mean, to really think of something new,
and it's
extraordinary.
Absolutely. It's because everybody's a creator. You create your own life story. You create your own journey. There is no predestined fate awaiting you. You are the master of your destiny. You are the captain of your journey.
Captain America,
and you create your life. You create your path, right? But most people don't understand that, and they don't learn that because and
they are afraid.
Yeah, and
they are afraid.
And this
They're very afraid, Jerry.
Yeah,
because
absolutely.
They've never been told to take that brave new step, right? And be bold. Except this is where I think we need to say that the Americans always encourage their young to be bold. Go for it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But we are a little bit more careful and always, tending to make sure that, beta, like don't go there, that kind of thing. So
the fear, the limitations, the trepidation is built into us in our nature and nurture, where we forget that we have the third element, which is the most powerful element, which other animals don't have, but we as rational animals have, which is that we either choose to follow the herd, which is 90% of the world, or we choose to walk the path less trodden and create our own path. And that's how creativity works.
Absolutely.
And I completely agree with you. It's an Eastern concept, and whenever I'm telling people that, if you achieve perfection, I always tell them that, this concept of perfection is such a lie. It is the biggest falsehood of the world, because no one no organization, no country, no human being can be perfect. And if
Yeah.
you're perfect, you're in the box, because
That's it. It's over.
the box is the coffin, right? You're dead,
Correct.
you're finished.
It's
That's the
over.
perfect
Yep.
state. Nothing more can
It's
happen.
done.
But till
Yep.
you're not in the box, stay out of the box, dissolve the
Correct.
box, and
Absolutely.
keep creating. And I
Correct.
think that's exactly what you brought to life in this one chapter that you read out. May I request
Correct.
you to read out another chapter, sir?
Um,
Another paragraph,
Another paragraph. Yeah.
which should
Um,
talk more about creativity across cultures.
Yeah. So I think one of the areas that I try to expand upon in the book is to say that when we talk about different cultures, we have to realize that even in the world of academia, there are different cultures.
Absolutely.
So the culture of physics is different from the culture of chemistry, different from the culture of astronomy, different from the culture of history, different from the culture of literature.
Right.
But literature becomes provocative because a lot of physicists, chemists, medical people, lawyers, they've all read some poem somewhere. They've read a short story. They've read some play of Shakespeare's and all that. So they all think they've got a right to come in and talk about these things.
In fact, I would go a step further, Dr. Kirpal Singh, and substantiate this with an example that even in the same department, the same subject, you could have a difference of cultures, right?
Absolutely.
So, for example, one teacher told us that your son disrupts the class and disturbs the class by asking too many questions. In the next year, same school, another teacher told us, your son asks such wonderful questions. It makes me wonder whether I really know my mathematics well.
There you go. There you go.
Same subject, two different cultures, two different mindsets, right? And I think that I completely agree with you. I completely comply with what you're saying.
We need to pay respect here to Socrates.
Absolutely.
Because Socrates said that the best way to teach a child is to just ask questions.
Absolutely. I cannot teach anyone anything. I can only make you think. Very powerful. And I always say that this is the humility of a teacher, rather than the hubris that you think you know it all and you can teach the kid. Learn from.
And you got it right, Jerry. You got it right for your thing, because when you have transformed as your last of the three pillars, right? I think that is important, because most of us may do the number one and number two, but the transformation thing comes with action, and therefore it means hard work, and therefore sometimes it means sacrifice as well.
Right, and that's why we have a very simple mantra in the Rex Karma with Global Fellowship. We say that nothing is great in our country, but that's because of our fault only. So if the country is not clean, let's not blame any government or politician. That's too shallow. Let's own responsibility. So in two words, the Mojo Inspirator book is about owning responsibility. And our passion mantra is, together as one, we can right every wrong. And how do you do that? I change to change the society. I change to change my community. I change to change my country. I change to change the world. And I change to change everything and everyone. It all starts with me. That's it.
Fantastic, right?
Right.
Isn't that fantastic?
And that's the creativity that we kind of talk about. And
you get a lot of people supporting you, right?
Right, absolutely.
I mean, I see a lot of pictures behind you. Those are beautiful drawings, artwork, and all that.
Right.
So you acquired them over the years. And they're very interesting, because each of them is like a beautiful creative story in itself, a whole adventure.
Absolutely,
right?
Absolutely. It's what makes the journey interesting.
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
Yes.
So your own journey, you must write about it. If you haven't already, you must write it in a good book.
I've thought of a title, because a few people have approached me to write my biography.
Very good.
The title is Once There Was Me.
Once there were you.
Because soon the day to go in the box will come, right? Till then, stay creative. So one more paragraph that we want
you are like 40 years younger than I am, so you got a long way to go, man.
No.
Even by my
I've turned 50 last year.
You got a long way to go.
So I've turned 50 last year. I'm not over the hill. I'm over the mountain now.
No, not at all. Now, when you reach 3 and 10, as the good Bible says, then you begin to reckon with with him above and say, and God gave men a lifespan of 3 and 10, right?
No, I don't think I would reckon even then, because I know that once I die, I'll just be burned. There's no heaven or hell waiting, because it all happened right here on earth. We have Narendra Modi as Prime Minister. What could be more hellish than that, right? Okay, so one more paragraph for all our readers, and then we'll have some closing insights and we'll close.
Okay, so one of the things that I think is very, very important is the fact that a lot of people think that creativity is something that we acquire as we go along the journey of education, and usually this acquisition comes later, but actually it comes very, very early. So here's the story. I'm quoting another person who told me why and how he began his journey on creativity. He said, and I quote, "I used to listen to my mother playing the piano, and my mind would wander," as in wonder, W-A-N-D-R. "Memory now plays tricks, but I recall that often I thought about combining art, dance, mathematics, and physics, subjects that I really enjoyed. In some ways, my childhood expectations came unreal. My dean at the University of Minnesota was a kind, gentle man with the usual rigor associated with the best of Jewish intellectuals. He probably taught me most about what you are interested in, that is creativity. He said, ask questions that are in the active, in the present tense. In other words, don't go to history, don't even be too futuristic, but address the very present. Ask questions that are active. You know, in grammar, we learn about active verbs and passive verbs and all that. But active verbs are the ones that drive us on, right? So a question like, how do you think? You know, my one interview question where a lot of students were really quite stunned was, how do you think when you think about entering the university? And so they would think about it and they say, sorry, Prof, do you mean this or do you mean that? And I would tell that their mind was cogitating and wondering about how to respond properly. Because on the one hand, they are worried. They give the wrong answer, they may not be admitted, right? But there was somebody, you know, a girl from Hong Kong, actually, quite ironically. She said to me, she said, don't you think that's a ridiculous question, Prof? Why don't you ask me a question that is more, you know, really challenging? And I said, you didn't find that one challenging? And she said, no. So I said, okay, here's a question for you. Why are your earrings matching your shoes in terms of color? And she suddenly melted. She said, you mean you noticed? she wore very bright, you know, red earrings, and I could see her shoes, right? Because she had one heel up there, and you know, red, beautiful red heels. And I thought, wow. And she said, oh, you mean you noticed? And I knew. I mean, this is an old man's trick, right? You look at these people, and you then. So I think learning is so important. And as you said, if you learn well, one of the things that you can do, and this is why good learners can be a bit dangerous for politicians.
Right, right.
Because good learners know how to transform. They know how to bring into play agents and agencies that will upset the system that people are used to.
They don't want transformation. They don't want people to change. They want people to remain as slaves while they think they are free in a democracy. And I always say democracy comes from two Greek words, demos and kratos, which means people power. It doesn't mean politician power, but whether it's the United States of America, which claims to be the world's greatest democracy, I don't know by what standards. They have the Statue of Liberty, and they say the land of the brave and the free. Where are the brave and where are the free? They have Joe Biden and Donald Trump as presidents, right? So, and then we are the land of the world's largest democracy by sheer numbers, because you know, procreation is our main pastime. So so that's how it works.
I think we most of us in the rest of the world gave up the challenge of trying to be really creative. I think, you know, having lived in America for a while myself in different periods of my life, I find that the Americans, they talk big, they, you know, pompous and a bit bombastic and very arrogant, you know, most of the time. But they also work bloody hard to really be different from the rest of the world.
Right.
And this is why they've got so many firsts. You know, I mean, from, if you think of the big corporations, you know, 3M, IBM, and all of these, even though they now have, you know, Indians are very good, the people from India, but they have all left India. They've gone to America. So the question I ask myself is, this nation, America, which is known to be very white, nevertheless has attracted people from all around the globe. And people, you know, once you say you're from Stanford or Harvard, wow, your ranking suddenly goes up, you know.
and the only reason they'll invite you is because they want to drain the brain and the brain drain, and
if they like you enough, they'll make you American.
And get people there who can contribute to strengthening their economy, though it's already collapsed long ago. And then you have the Native Americans, who are the original inhabitants, who are wondering what the hell are they celebrating Columbus Day for? And who's Columbus to discover us? Because
Correct.
Columbus was nothing but a murderer, a plunderer, a rapist, and
Correct.
they celebrate Columbus Day, and that is the
Correct.
truth of our
So
time.
there are ironies within ironies.
Right. And ironically, history always celebrates plunderers, murderers, and rapists.
Absolutely.
Whether it is Alexander or Tipu Sultan or
Absolutely.
Ashoka
That's right.
or Columbus, who are all nothing but plundering thieves.
Plundering
right.
people,
And of
yeah.
course, the Queen of England. Right. So,
She doesn't want to return the jewel, huh?
Right. Yeah. Nothing but plundering thieves, right? And they call it an empire. Anyway, so thank you. It was delightful having a conversation with you.
No,
I
thank
got
you
a lot
so
of,
much. Great
lot of
privilege,
insights,
yeah.
and I see that there's a lot of like-mindedness on the concept of creativity.
Sure.
One insight I want to share with all the parents is,
Sure.
please don't impose your thoughts, your
Yes.
limitations, your blind beliefs onto your children. It's what Tagore said
Absolutely.
many years ago, and since we spoke about Tagore, and he said,
Yeah.
do not force your learning and limitations onto your children. Remember, they're born in a different time, in a different era. So the world has
Absolutely.
moved on and you're still way behind. And that's what a lot of parents and educators do to children.
Because they're stuck.
They push their limiting beliefs, thoughts, insights onto the child. And that's why I start my parenting and teacher training programs with one simple line, or rather one simple question. Are future unready parents and educators preparing children for the future? And then I ask them, what's your answer? And they have no answer because they don't know what to say. Right.
Because they haven't thought about it.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Kirpal Singh. And any closing insights that you want to share with the audience?
You and all that. I've been reading about you, but this is great. Yeah.
Thank
Wonderful.
you. Pleasure. And we should have you more, for another conversation.
Always,
you can share the concept of creative thinking. And this is a pre-recorded conversation which will benefit a lot of students, because we are actually preparing students, because right now there are no jobs, right?
Yeah.
So students who have been mentored and coached by their educators and parents to become career mules are not finding career options.
They need to change now. Yeah.
Right. So what we've told them is, yes, it is a grim situation, but it's not all gloom and doom, because you can use this as a golden opportunity to actually pursue your passion and make that into your life mission. Right.
Wonderful.
So we are doing pre-recorded sessions with mentors from around the world, and we would love to have you to talk on creative thinking. I'll send you a separate invite for that.
Sure.
Any closing insights that you have for all the people who are listening in?
Yeah, I would say, first, never be afraid to use the word creative. Give credit. Tell people you are creative. Hey, that's so creative. I really want to know more about this. I've come up with a beautiful new idea. That's creative. Can I share that with you? Never be afraid of your own creativity or someone else's creativity. Encourage it, nurture it, promote it, and make sure that everybody within your reach gets to hear and know about your creativity or someone else's creativity through you. You'll be doing mankind a great service, because in all the people who are creative around you, there will be a few Newtons, there will be a few Tagores, there will be a few Gandhis, there'll be a few other people. I mean, who would have thought that someone like Gandhi would come up with this great creative idea that the best way to get rid of these blooming politicians that were just greedy for power would be just to walk around and gather a lot of people in the dhotis to go and sit down and make a protest.
Absolutely. And it's the entire concept of non-violence.
Yeah, correct.
It's such a creative concept. Non-violence on one side, and then you say struggle and fight. So non-violence fight, right? So it's a very creative idea, and I think Gandhi as a man had a lot of flaws, but most of his teachings are very brilliant. So thank you for those insights, noble nuggets of wisdom from you, Dr. Kirpal Singh. Thank you so much. And for all of you, the book is available on Amazon and at leading bookstores. The book is called Thinking Hats and Colored Turbans, published by Pearson in the year 2004. Please go and get it. You will get a lot of creative insights for your own personal, professional development, discovery, and transformation. So thank you, Dr. Kirpal Singh. Have a great rest of the evening, and my love and regards to all at home.
And you too, yeah.
Just to
I'm going to go to bed.
Who all are family at home now?
My wife and my son, they're both
Okay.
at home. Yeah.
Okay. So you have one son and one wife. Excellent. Great. Brilliant. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. Namaste. Sat
Thank you
Sri
very
Akal,
much.
and my
Good
love and
night, huh?
regards to them. Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for
Thank
having
you.
me. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
See you.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye.